Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone. This is Mikki. You are listening to Mikkipedia, and today on the show, I get to sit down and chat to Tom Williams. Anyone who is involved in running, particularly marathon running, will be well familiar with Tom. So Tom is the Chief Operating Officer of Parkrun and former Marathon Talk co-host, and we talk all about building community and connection through running. So Tom, as Global Chief Operating Officer of Parkrun, helps organise the incredibly successful charity that provides free timed 5K runs for people around the world. At the time of us recording this, Parkrun has had over 60 million interactions of participants and or volunteers, with an average of over 200 people in each event each week, supporting people to run over 200 million kilometres in total, which is an amazing feat. So Tom shares with us the spirit, the culture and ethos of inspiring people to exercise through Parkrun, and the impact that the pandemic has had on Parkrun, and why it is potentially even more important now to participate. Of course, alongside Parkrun, Tom was also co-host of Marathon Talk with Martin Yelling, which is another incredibly successful podcast, and he was co-host up until 2019, then stepped down to focus on his role at Parkrun, but of course making regular guest appearances. Now, Marathon Talk actually has just retired at 600 episodes, and Tom and I sat down to speak on the eve of the release of that episode in mid-January. So we were able to discuss the impact of Marathon Talk with regards to the inception of it and the ongoing commitment that it created for Tom, and the positive impact this had on Tom's well-being. So we do talk about these two things and a number of other topics that sort of spring from the current climate of the pandemic a little bit, but also much more importantly, the ability to build that connection and community through running. Tom can be found at Parkrun, which is www.parkrun.com, or over on Twitter at TomWilliams1974, and we've included the links to both of those in the show notes. Now, before we get on to the interview, I'd just like to remind you the best way you can support the podcast is to jump on your favourite podcast platform and hit subscribe. That would be amazing. And if you feel like leaving a 5-star review, that would also be wonderful. If you want to go that extra mile, I do have a number of meal plans that you can sign up for on Williden.com, including my very basic recipe access portal, which provides you with over 800 recipes regularly updated, a weekly email, access to our private Facebook group where we have a written Q&A forum each week and regular Facebook Lives, and the ability for me to answer any of your nutrition related questions through my messaging system. All right, team, please enjoy my conversation with Tom Williams. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me what is very early morning and probably quite cold and dark for you. There are a couple of terms which spring to mind when I think about you, and one of them is service to the running community through Marathon Talk, and also, of course, through Parkrun, and of course, connection, which both of these things have provided us runners the platform to be able to connect with each other worldwide, particularly important right now. I've got to say, though, I didn't think that I'd be opening the podcast asking you how you felt about that bombshell that was dropped last week. Marathon Talk, 600 episodes and gone burger.
600 and out. I know it's quite a thing. I think Martin and I started it in 2010, and we didn't have kids. Well, I certainly didn't have kids. Martin might have had Ruby, actually. I can't remember whether Ruby was teeny tiny or whether she hadn't been born yet. But anyway, we lived in different places to we live now. We had different lives we have now. I Parkrun existed, but I wasn't. I'd started an event, but I wasn't working for Parkrun, and so I think of course, we were 12 years younger as well, which makes a big difference. And I think it ran its course, and I think probably we always wanted to. We never set we'll do it for this long or that long. We just thought we'll just do it while we enjoy it, and we always enjoyed it, and we're absolute best friends as a result of doing it, which is really, really wonderful, and probably the best gift so speaking for myself, that I've had from it. That Martin, Liz, and the kids are huge parts of our family really now too. But I think it had got to the point where it just wasn't lighting our fires like it used to, and I think we kind of felt. I mean, I stepped away a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, but I think we both wanted never to resent it, and never to not to turn into something you think, oh, I'm not doing that again, oh, it's rubbish, and also not become very good at it, because I think when you're not passionate about something, that was for me, I think the reason why I left after about 500 episodes. I just thought, I'm going to become not very good at this, because it's not really inspiring me, and that's not a criticism of any individual. It was just a change in circumstances and life, and also the sport of running. I think probably lost. We both lost some interest in the kind of the elite end, the sport end of running. It lost its way for a bit, and it seems to have found it again a little bit. I mean, I think Jess Judd ran 67 minutes for a half marathon at Houston over the weekend. And I think Sarah Hall also ran quicker than that, 67:15 or something, and it starts maybe getting interesting again. I don't know, but yeah, there we go. It's 600 and out, and I think we're exceptionally proud of what it became and what it was, and it's now bookended as that was it, 600 episodes.
Yeah, I know. And then, it feels so weird to think that it's not going to be there, because it's just been this absolute kind of solid thing that you can count on week as a runner. You sort of, you check in with how your mates are going, because, and I've heard you talk on a podcast before about how, people listen to podcasts for very different reasons. And I know people listen to Fitter Radio, which is one I'm a co-host of with my mate Bevan, and we are not 600 episodes. We started 2012, but a lot of people just tune in to see what we're talking about and really don't have a lot of interest in what the athletes are doing and what the race results are that training tip or whatever. It's just sort of, they like to hear our voices in their earbuds as they're going and doing their training, which is quite, that's sort of the role, I suppose, that podcasts are playing for a lot of people these days.
Definitely. And, when we set up Marathon Talk, we spoke to Bevan and John from what was then called Ironman Talk about what to do, because I was a massive Ironman Talk fan, being an Ironman triathlete at the time, and it was weird for me speaking to Bevan then in what would have been 2009 actually, because we started January 2010, so. And thinking, God, I know so much about you, and you know nothing about me because I'm just a listener, and I know all your trials and tribulations of life, really. And I think that we learned a lot from people like that around sharing the personal stuff. Is really, really important. It's making that connection, and really making it a social thing. And actually, this week we've done a thing on Marathon Talk where we've got people to send in like sound bites of what Marathon Talk meant to them, and we're going to put them in the show, and it's incredible, the impact. And some of these people, like some of the people have become great friends, and so you're like, such and such has sent something in, I knew they would. But then other people, you think, I'm not sure you've ever emailed in, I've never met you, I've never heard from you, I didn't know you're out there, and yet this little chat we've been having, and later with Holly once I left, has change your life in a really profound way, and I didn't even know. It's amazing, really.
It is amazing, isn't it? And it makes you appreciate the privilege you have when you sort of step behind a microphone and then you just talk about your day, you talk about sort of what's going on with you, and you forget that like, I don't know about you, Tom, but almost every time we switch record off, I forget what I am talking about. And I don't even think about what it was I've said, because I'm really just having a chat to my mate. Yeah. And so people come up to me and they repeat back to me what I've said. And I'm like, did we discuss that even?
Yeah.
I don't even think about it. And I think that's
I think responsibility as well. You have a responsibility, I think, to be authentic. I really do think that. I think that was something I felt really, really, really strongly over the entire 10 years I did Marathon Talk was, I've got to be really authentic here. I can never, ever say something that I don't believe in, because people are really listening to it and really taking it on board and really believing in things, or not. Plenty of people think I'm an idiot or something, I don't know, but I'm authentic. And I think when you're not authentic, I think you're really doing a disservice to people who are listening to what you're saying, because a lot of people are really listening to what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And of course, as you've said, over the last couple of years, you've stepped back from Marathon Talk, but I don't doubt that it's sort of coming to an end, despite the fact that it's coming at a nice round number of 600, which I know that, that probably brings you a small amount of joy. It will, I imagine, still feel like a little bit of a loss. I don't know. And because I've heard you chat on another podcast actually about how you didn't really realise at the time, but that weekly check-in with Martin, you guys at the other end, at different kind of ends of the country, probably got that wrong, I'm not very good with geography, but that it was almost like this, that's what sort of lifted you or kept you lifted on certain weeks when, for whatever reason, the stress of life or work sort of just kind of can grind you down. You'd always leave the sort of recording of Marathon Talk and just feel a little bit better, and you didn't really connect the two as this really good mental health sort of intervention, or not intervention, I suppose, strategy.
Absolutely right. I think, I already miss talking to Martin so regularly, I think, and you just don't. You shouldn't need an excuse. You shouldn't need an excuse to schedule a call with a friend, but you kind of often do, or I often do, and I try and make more of an effort to reach out to him and send him, because we are opposite ends of the country. I'm in North Yorkshire and he's on the south coast. But if you were kind of prescribing health, to say to somebody, pick health into, and it would be an intervention really, or a strategy. If you would say to somebody, pick a friend and phone them religiously for an hour every single week and just chat, whatever, whether you think you need to or not, and set a time for it. So whatever, every Friday when we spoke at Marathon Talk, every kind of Tuesday, normally about 6 o'clock or something, every Tuesday at 6, ring this friend for 10 years. I guarantee it would make a massive impact on your health, and that's the totality of it. It's as simple as that, and it's as pure as that. And we went through all kinds of crazy things. I mean, we never fell out, which is great. We've always been really good friends. We've never fallen out about anything, which is really nice. But yeah, and I missed that already, because I stopped doing that a year and a half ago actually.
And it was sort of interesting timing with that too. It's almost like an observation. It's like you move back from Marathon Talk, and because of course your role in Parkrun, which obviously we want to talk about, that's clearly a very busy thing for you in addition to just life in general. And then we're hit with this pandemic where our usual outlets for stress relief, where we connect with friends, where we exercise, is suddenly sort of taken away. And then over the last 2 years, I mean, they're back, but they're not back. They're not back for a lot of people the way that we sort of grew to love them and grew to sort of rely on them. Like, it's been a really crazy time.
Yeah, it's been a remarkable time. I mean, I don't think nobody could have envisaged the last 2 years. I don't think it's and even now, where we are now, I don't think anybody could have envisaged that either. It's I think we've seen good and bad in society, haven't you? So you've seen amazing compassion and empathy, and amazing support and creativity, but also you've seen amazing lack of empathy and lack of compassion, and you've seen both sides of society, and it's been a bit worrying for me how quickly how quickly things went wrong in my opinion, in terms of society, in terms of some things, some types of restrictions, whatever that might be, and that's worrying, and I hope our kids are learning from it and will do a better job when it's their turn in 20 years time.
And Tom, obviously we're going to be chatting about Parkrun and just sort of how the origin of Parkrun and how it sort of grew and sort of it feels like it exploded. I'm sure it didn't for you, sort of down on the ground floor. I know it sort of probably took as I understand, took a few years to sort of grow and develop but it feels like it has exploded. How has the pandemic affected Parkrun at the operating level?
It's a really good question. I mean, in terms of, I mean, we have two sort of ways it can be affected. So one is a health and well-being thing. So, you know, who's been affected of people who's not come back or who's suffered most, and then there's the operational side. And really, it's Chrissy Wellington, who is our global lead for health and well-being, the triathlete Chrissy Wellington. She oversees a lot of our health and well-being stuff. The operational stuff really comes back to me, and it's a really good question. And you know, we try to, when the pandemic hit in February, March 2020, we had to close down quite quickly. You know, things unraveled quite fast, didn't they, globally? You know, from it's not really going to be anything here. I mean, I don't know what it was like in New Zealand, but certainly in the UK, it's something that's happening in other countries, to suddenly everything closing down, and that was a relatively straightforward process. Caught everybody off guard, but we did it, and we operate in 23 countries now, 22 countries then. Actually, we were about to start Austria and we hadn't, so we're 22 countries then. We closed everything down, and then we had some discussions about what does it mean. And one of the fundamental things we agreed, so overall we're a charity, so Parkrun Global is a charity based in the UK. So we agreed with the global when we sat down, when everything closed down, we sat down with the trustees, we sat down with our kind of staff team. We said, what does this mean? How do we come back? Because at that point in time, nobody knew whether it was going to be a month or 10 years or anything in between. And we agreed that we must protect the health and well-being components of Parkrun, which come with being open and accessible and free, and you don't have to pre-register and so on. And actually, we mustn't come back in a way that breaks those, potentially even at the cost of not coming back. Now, obviously, we'd have to have that discussion if it ever came to it. If we were saying, okay, let's say you've got to limit it to 50 people and have pre-registration, which would kill the health and well-being component of it. We can't do that as we are now anyway. I mean, those have been questions that have been asked for us a lot recently, where Wales brought in some restrictions. But that would you couldn't that would impact those most in need of physical activity the most, and so I don't think we'd have brought it back like that. So we decided let's design a way Parkrun can return as safely, in inverted commas, as safely as possible in terms of COVID, but without breaking the essence of what Parkrun is. And we set about writing our Parkrun framework, which anybody can see at volunteer.parkrun.com. We set about writing that framework. We based it on the evidence, so we commissioned a university in the United Kingdom to review all of the evidence around outdoor transmission. We then, using that as a kind of a foundation, the evidence around outdoor transmission or lack of outdoor transmission, we then created this COVID framework, which would apply to every event in the world, and it had to be sustainable and scalable. We couldn't have you do this in this part of the world, this in this part of the world, this in this part of the world. We couldn't add loads of complexity to a really simple model. On our biggest ever weekend, we processed 401 or 410,000 walks, jogs and runs, and another 30,000 volunteers, all for free, all really simply, all on the same day. And that relies on lots of little things in the background that make it simple to do and cheap to do and so on. And so we wrote that framework, and then we got a professor of infectious disease sort of transmission, and to model, okay, if parkruns happen under this framework, what is the likelihood of impact of infection in a community based on prevalence levels of the virus and based on the various things, like we limited our pre-event briefing to 2 minutes and so on. And he showed that he modelled that to be exceptionally low risk, and so then we reopened and we moved forwards with that. And so it was a really, really, really big undertaking. I sit here in the middle of it, knowing I think this weekend gone, I think we had 220,000 people at parkrun events around the world.
Amazing.
And I take that responsibility really, really seriously. We have a team that work on how that should be, our COVID framework, our operating framework, our principles. I'm ultimately responsible for that. And I do take that really, 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 we do take that really, really, really seriously, because we don't want to be exposing people to, unacceptable levels of risk in anything we do, so it was a big thing.
No, of course. And of course, the risk of not going ahead, you then lose one of the massive benefits of Parkrun, don't you? Which is one of the reasons, and I've heard you talk about it before, which did make me laugh, but also so resonated, that it was like a social intervention for a lonely bloke. That's how Parkrun sort of developed, and for us not to have access to be able to go along to our local park run and hang out with 200 of our now mates, to then go for a run and kind of clock in our times and have a banana afterwards, then jog home. Like the risks associated with kind of removing that for us, I think from a mental health perspective, that's the stuff I feel like that's a fallout that we could be dealing with, which is just as important.
Definitely. And that was the most, I think, frustrating thing, is we'd created this, we turned what Paul Sinton Hewitt had created Parkrun as, initially a kind of a social intervention for himself, actually, as as we reflected on it, Paul and I, over the years, and then realized that we all have that need to be social and active and outdoors, at different levels. Some people are more extrovert than others, but we all, I think every single human being, I think, has that in them somewhere, to be outdoors and in the company of others in some way, and to be active. And we'd create this wonderful thing over the last 17 and a half years now, 15 and a half years then, and then suddenly, right when the world needed it the most, it was taken away. And I do understand, and I agree that it was the right thing to do to close it at the time. So when it, I don't know how much of our health people get publicity over in New Zealand, but they're probably one of the most credible health leaders in this country has turned out to be Jonathan Van Tam, who was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, still is actually. He's about to stand down from that role. But he really has been credible in the public eye here, and credible professionally, and really, most people would probably agree, Jonathan Van Tam's done a really good job of in his role of guiding the country through the pandemic. And he is a massive keen park runner. In fact, he was at Parkrun this Saturday. He's a massive keen park runner, and he's park run for about 7 or 8 years, I think. And he actually rang us up in March 2020, and myself and a couple of colleagues, I can't remember who it was, it would have been Nick Pearson maybe, I can't remember, but myself and a couple of others had a conversation with Jonathan Van Tam, and Jonathan Van Tam was saying, look, Parkrun's really, really important. I wonder if there's a way we can keep it open safely at this time. And remember, we don't know what we know now. This is March 2020. And we all agreed with Jonathan Van Tam it was the right thing to close, and so we closed, and that was fine. I think what frustrates me is relatively quickly, I don't know, 3 to 6 months or so in, it became very, very clear that outdoor activities were incredibly safe. Relative to all the other things we have to do. People have to work in Amazon warehouses or in supermarkets, and people have to be at home with other people, and there are things you have to do. But it was really, really safe, and I think not keeping things like we had this thing last summer in the UK or summer before last, called Eat Out to Help Out, where they were trying to kind of, I totally understand it, and I'm pretty pro opening in general with these things. Like you could get half price food in food outlets to help the hospitality industry get back on its feet, and I kind of I agree with that, really, in principle. However, we found ourselves in this weird situation where we weren't allowed to open Parkrun, but you could, so you couldn't queue for your barcode with your barcode, but you could queue in McDonald's for half price junk food. And I just remember thinking, this is the wrong way round. We've not got our priorities right here, and I think that's been a frustration for me, that like I say, we'd spend years and years and years building this thing to be a social intervention primarily for people when they're in times of need, and then right when people are at their biggest time of need, we take it away. And once the evidence was clear, I think, in my opinion, that outdoor events like Parkrun are both important, huge public health benefit, and also very low risk, then they should be open. And so, yeah, that was frustrating. But we're mostly back now, and we're back in New Zealand, thankfully.
Yes.
and most of Australia and so on. So yeah, we're getting back, and hopefully we've learnt a lot that we can, and we've got a bit more of a voice now that we can lobby going forwards to not be closed in similar situations.
Yeah, completely. And you know what I love about Parkrun, Tom, is like I've been an avid runner for most of my life since I was a teenager, right? But I've always really been quite, I've shied away from the shorter events because I just get scared to run fast, and then I get scared to know how slow I am. And what I love about Parkrun
it's painful as well, yeah.
is it completely took the pressure at the start line off away, you know, and actually my fear of failure has prevented me from towing the start line in many events over the years, but that's really changed over the last 3 years since I've become a regular and massive supporter of of Parkrun, because I just now go along and I see it as it's a challenge against myself and my previous time, or I already decide what kind of event I'm going to have today. Am I just going to pace it nice and even? Am I going to do negative splits? Am I going to try and beat Tom? You know, all of these different goals that I have in my head.
Yeah.
But I go along and I also know that I'm going to see like 5 or 6 people who I can chat to, but then 100 other people I'm going to recognise because they're also there on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and then it's done and dusted all by 9. Like, and then you can get on with your your weekend. Like,
yeah.
I think what you guys have created is just, it's amazing actually for runners of all abilities.
Yeah. And we saw an interesting change in the early days. So in the very early days, so initially Parkrun was called a time trial. So it was the Bushy Park time trial. And then I got involved from event number 4, which was in Leeds in England, which was initially called the Hyde Park time trial. And then it was called Leeds Park Run, and then it's called Woodhouse Moor Park Run, because really Woodhouse Moor is the right name for the park. Anyway, but in those early days, the very early days, it was anybody was always welcome. There were never any cut-offs. You absolutely could come and walk it, and that you'd be heartily welcomed from day one. You could have done that; it'd have been fine. However, it was seen by a lot of people as a time trial, and therefore, particularly within the running community, of which I was part of then, I still am, but was fully part of then. And it was seen as kind of you against the clock. I mean, that was a kind of a term we had in the early days. And the interesting thing I saw is that people would come regularly and get to milestones and all those kind of things. But if they had a race on a Sunday or on a Saturday afternoon, sometimes they wouldn't come. So they wouldn't turn up. They go, no, I can't do Parkrun on Saturday because I've got a race on Sunday, really important race. But then they'd really miss it. And then they'd have another race on a Sunday and they wouldn't come, and they'd really miss it. And we didn't have such a volunteering ethos then, so they wouldn't necessarily think of volunteering, maybe, I don't know, but they wouldn't come. And they missed it. So you could see it over the months and years, this kind of tension grew between, I've got this thing I really, really like doing every single week. I've got also like racing really hard. I can't do both because I don't want to run flat out on a Saturday and flat out on a Sunday. Therefore, I can't do Parkrun. And then people started thinking, well, what if I just jog around Parkrun easy? And that was like an anathema to some people in those early days. Like, what do you mean? If there's a clock, you can't go easy. You've got to absolutely murder yourself. Otherwise, it's not worth it. And then people started sort of, well, I'm going to whisper it. I'm just going to jog around really easy. And sometimes they wouldn't even take a time because they'd be so like embarrassed that they hadn't rinsed themselves. And so then they'd jog, they might normally run 20 minutes and they'd run 35 minutes or something. And they'd go, actually, that was a load of, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed not going flat out. And I had a great race on the Sunday still. And then over the years, it changed. And I think that really drove this actually. Sometimes start at the back and jog around and have a chat. Sometimes run with your kids. Sometimes run with your mate. Sometimes pace your mate. Sometimes go flat out. And it evolved into what I think most people treat it as now, which is whatever you want it to be on the day. And my son yesterday did his 50th junior Parkrun, and he's only 7, and he's more often than not he'll bimble around chatting with his mates, and he likes to kind of look after people. So if there's a younger kid, a 5-year-old or something that he knows, he'll kind of put his arm around with them and go around with them. And for some reason yesterday he decided, I don't know why, it was his 50th, and he hadn't said he was going to do it, but it's a 2-lapper, our juniors, with a little figure eight. So you see them after kind of half a lap, and then 1 lap, and then 1.5 and 2. After half a lap, he was so far ahead of anywhere he'd ever been before. I thought he's either cheated and cut a corner, or he's gone off way too hard and he's going to detonate. And he ran flat out all the way round, left all his mates behind, ran off into the distance, smashed himself, PB'd by 56 seconds, and just loved it. And I thought, oh my word, that's great. You've obviously consciously thought, I'm going to smash it today. And he's really put some effort in. And yet next week he'll probably be literally 5 minutes slower and chat to his friends, because that's what he wants to do. And I think even for super elite athletes, or athletes that are really serious about their training, as I used to, I was never elite, but as I used to be serious when I was doing Ironman and marathons and so on, actually a little bit of that childlike mentality of, I'm going to smash it today, I'm just going to chat today, I'm not going to bother today. Yeah. And having that relaxation around it, I think is really helpful. And Parkrun hopefully helps that, because it's there every week. So there's not that pressure of, this is once a year. If I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it.
Yes.
It's like, I'm not up for it today. I'm just going to volunteer, or I'm going to chill out. So yeah, hopefully it's changed the culture a little bit.
I feel like it really has, Tom. And, I mentioned, and you backed up the idea of that social intervention for a lonely bloke. Can you describe that? Like, sort of just how that happened for Paul, who was the, founder of it. And because I think it's such a good story.
Yeah. And it's also a good lesson in incredibly good things can come out of low points and challenges and negative things. So Paul St. Hugh, who's founder of Parkrun, he created it back in 2004. He was a South African. Well, he still is South African. He is a South African. Quite a serious runner, marathon PB 2:36, I think, about 15-20 years ago. When we 4 Parkruns would be 20 years ago. Quite a serious runner, and he was going through a difficult time in his life, and he talks about this story a lot publicly. So he was going through a difficult time in his life. He was struggling with family life. He was struggling with home life and work, and it just he wasn't in a good place at all. And Paul's, what is he, 61 now? So he'd have been very early 40s, late 30s at the time. He was going through a really difficult time. And for him, running, as much as he took running very, very seriously and trained very, very hard, running was his outlet for his challenges in life, and his running friends were his friends. And so he was running. I think he was running in Bushy Park. He was out for a run with one of his dogs, and he tripped over it, and he got some kind of injury. I've never even asked him what the injury was, but anyway, he got some kind of injury, and the physio said, you're going to be out for a long time. And I don't think he ran for a year or two. It was quite a serious thing, whatever it was. I feel like it was one of those little injuries that it's not like, you snapped your leg into 3 pieces. It's like one of those little things that never goes away, anyway.
Yeah.
So he was in this position where he was having a really difficult time in life, and the thing that kept him going, which was running seriously, was taken away from him, and was going to be taken away from him for a period of time. And he really didn't know what to do, and inspired by the South African running clubs that he used to be a part of, where they often have weekly time trials. So clubs will say, I think it might not be on a Saturday, I don't know, but once a week they'll go to a certain place and they'll do a time trial over a not a set distance necessarily. He decided to create something similar in Bushy Park in West London, which was his local park, where basically he would set out a 5K course. Wasn't actually precisely 5K in those early days. I think it was a little bit short. I like winding the Australians up, because Craig Mottram had the original world record on Bushy Park run course.
It was a short course.
And a slightly short course. And then the course was it was measured, I think, by Hugh Jones, who's a famous runner here and official course measurer here, made it a little bit longer. And then Andy Badley took the record off Craig Mottram on an accurate course. So not only did we take the record off the Australians, but we also took it off them on a longer course, which I like saying. On a longer course. And Badders has still got the record. He set that in 2012, and so we're coming up to 10-year anniversary of that, 13:48, which is impressive on a Saturday morning, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And so Mottram had run 14 flat, I think, 14:00. Anyway, so Paul decided as a kind of partly as a coping mechanism for himself, for his life, to say to his friends, I'll set up a 5K course at Bushy Park every Saturday morning. You lot come along and run it. I'll stand there with a stopwatch and time you, and then we'll all go for coffee afterwards. And it'll all be free, and it'll be nice and social, and we'll go for coffee. And that first week, 13 people turned up. And I think there were 4 volunteers plus Paul. And the next week there was, I think, 11, and the next week there was 14. And it you said earlier, Mikki, about it growing gradually. For 2.5 years, that was it. It was just the Bushy Park time trial in West London with Paul and a handful of his friends, and they just went every single week, including Christmas Day, which was a Saturday in 2004. And they just went every single week, and it was, became a social intervention really quickly, and in fact right from the start, because Paul had this gap in his life. And I think often when so many great things so many great inventions and so many great movements, they're started by somebody who identifies a problem in their own life, fixes that problem, and then that turns out loads of other people have the same problem, and then it it grows around the world. And I think whether you were definitely struggling with life in some kind of way like Paul was, or whether you just weren't aware you needed a little bit more socializing in your life, like maybe myself was. I didn't think I had a gap in my life, and yet, I remember my wife saying to me when we first got involved in 2007, my wife Helen saying to me, "What? Every week we're gonna have to be in the park every week?" Yeah. For how long? Well, maybe forever. I don't know. It's just going to be every week. We'll see what happens. Yeah. And she's just done has she just done it, or did she miss it because she had laryngitis? She's not quite done it. She's stuck on 299 runs. So she's done 270 odd, I think, volunteering instances. She's done 299 park runs. I think she just got laryngitis off the back of COVID, so she's missed a couple. So I don't think she's done a 300th. I think her next park run will be her 300th.
Amazing.
And you just can't believe it. Here we are 14 years later, and it's definitely a social intervention for us. I mean, definitely. I was a sub 10 hour Ironman triathlete, sub 3 hour marathoner. I'd started a running club. It's all back in 2007 when we got involved. I had, Helen and I were together. We had a great life. I didn't think anything was missing from my life, really. But when you took it away, when it got taken away in March 2020, you realised I just don't have this outlet anymore. I don't see my friends. I don't, so we realised, I think for all of us, it's a social thing.
Well, it's interesting, particularly with running, and I don't know other sports intimately the way I do running, but all of my best girlfriends and best relationships have come from running. And and so these are like my, university school friends, or even women that I've met as an older runner, older. I mean, I've just aged myself up probably quite a bit, but you know what I mean, like middle-aged, whatnot. And even like people I meet now that I'm like, oh, you're a runner. And then suddenly there's just this instant connection, and you can go on a run with someone, and suddenly you're sharing your most kind of like innermost thoughts and experiences and feelings with a stranger that isn't, because you feel like you already know them because you've got running. And I don't know if it is like that with other sports. I mean, you're a triathlete, maybe it's the same with triathlon, but there's just something about particularly being outdoors, sharing a similar experience that really sort of connects you with people. And that's that whole connection thing. Running is amazing, and parkrun just brings that.
Look, I think that's right. And I don't know the New Zealand running scene at all, but speaking for the UK sort of running scene, I think, and I don't think it's just Parkrun that's done this, but I think pre-Parkrun, which is pre-2004, there was, I think the sort of various parts of the sport of running were disconnected. So you were kind of either an elite, super serious runner in very short shorts, absolutely smashing yourself and dribbling all over the place, or you were a charity runner just dressed as a chicken, and there was kind of nothing in between, and the two never met. And if you were a volunteer, you were about 200 years old, and that was it. Right? You had these kind of three sort of cohorts that never really existed in a way. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing that, but I think one of the things we've really tried to push, and I think we've played a part in here, is that is the kind of the equality of it all. So genuinely, Andy Badley said to me that when he ran the world record he'd gone out of the Olympic semi-final in 2012 of, I think it would have been the 1500 meters, was annoyed with himself for not progressing from the semi-final to the final of the Olympic 1500. He then turned up on the Saturday morning with some frustration to take out with his coach on a bike and said, right, I'm going to smash this. I'm going to go for the parkrun world record here. And he did that. And he ran 13:48 and he got a massive round of applause on the start line. Then everybody's chatting to him at the end. And, he said to me that was one of the most moving moments for him in his entire athletic career, because he really felt part of a community, which he wouldn't normally. And this is somebody in world-class Olympic level fitness, being applauded by people who are going to do 5K in 45 or 50 minutes, some of them walk it in over an hour, and felt a real connection to them. And I think they felt a real connection to him. And I've spoken to a lot of people who will say, oh yeah, I take 40 minutes for a parkrun. I look at my watch at 13:48 and think Andy Badley would have finished now, and I can't believe where I am. And that's a really positive thing. And they share in that experience, because we all know what it's like to run 5K. And people like Andy Badley will say, they'll speak to somebody who's in the 250 club or something, so they've done 250 park runs, and he'll think that's an amazing achievement, and he'll say, oh, what an amazing achievement, that's really wonderful. He doesn't go, yeah, but you've never broken 14 minutes. He genuinely says, that's a wonderful achievement, I'm really impressed, I don't know if I could do that. And they're saying, what you've done is a wonderful achievement, I don't know if I could do that. And I think bringing that all together, is we've got people that have volunteered 500 times. One of our staff members, Helen Hood, has volunteered over 500 times. So she's in a 500, like different, not roles, like different days. That's 10 years of commitment, even if you never miss one. And another member of our staff, Jazz Banger, she's done, I think we've probably got a few people in the 500 club running, but she's walked or run 500 park runs, and that's 10 years of commitment. You can't fast track that. It doesn't matter how rich you are, it doesn't matter how fit you are, it doesn't matter what training you do, you can't fast track it. It's 10 years minimum of consistent effort. And whether you average an hour for your 500 park runs or 15 minutes for your 500 park runs is partly neither here nor there. But we do celebrate performance too, and that's really important. I think you mustn't, I don't think, sacrifice performance and self-improvement in the name of participation. Both are valid. You can do both or you can do either, and they're totally fine. But most parkrun events will know their course record holders, male and female, and will celebrate them. And when they turn up, they'll love it, and they'll go, oh, such and such is here, at Woodhouse Moor, my parkrun. I think Dan Garbutt's probably still got the record. We're going back more than 10 years here. I think he's the only one to break 15 minutes. He did 14:59, I think. Oh, and it's not the fastest course in the world. And people look at it and go, wow, that's amazing. And, if he turns up again, they're like, oh, Dan's here, great. Are you going to go for the record? And so I think it brings all of that together and validates all of it. So whether you've got tiny little shorts on and Nike Alpha Flies and you want to smash yourself. Alex Yee, who's become a very well-known triathlete over the last few years, he got 2 medals at the Olympics, didn't he? I think he might be the second fastest. I think he's broken 14 minutes at a parkrun, but not quite got the world record. And every now and again he'll turn up at a parkrun. I think Dulwich is his most common parkrun. He's had the record there a few times. In fact, I think he swapped with Paul Martelletti, who's a fellow Kiwi. And I think him and Marders have gone backwards and forwards with the course record at Dulwich a few times. Yeah. But people really love that. They really enjoy that. And it's so I think that's a really, really important thing. Again, we were talking earlier about, I think wherever you are in sport, whether you want to purely just participate and turn up, or whether you want to really be the best you can possibly be, having the mindset of I'm going to do what I want to do today. So whether it's easy or hard or fun or not or whatever. I think the same thing, in terms of whether you're going flat out to break a course record or whether you're walking around as tail walker, or it's all totally valid, and they don't have to be exclusive to each other.
Yeah, completely. And parkrun is a vehicle for almost every experience that you've just described. Tom, So obviously you weren't there right at the beginning, but you weren't far off. How on earth did one or two sort of small, like little community events turn into this massive global sort of not-for-profit organisation, charity organisation? How does that happen?
It was really interesting. So Paul started Parkrun in 2004, as I said, and at the time for him, at that time, this is my understanding, having talked to him about it possibly more than anybody else ever has. I've spent 15 years now chatting to him about it.
Yeah.
Very initially, that was it. So he wanted this, what was called a time trial then, in his local park, and that was it. And then the second one, and I always get these two the wrong way round. So it was either, I'm going to get really confused now, Wimbledon Common or Banstead Woods. And I for some reason, I have a mental block of which was 2 and which was 3. I think Wimbledon was 2, but I could be wrong. Bushy started to get quite busy, and I mean, we laugh at it now because it was like quite busy being 200 or 300 people, I think, and now they get 1,500 or 2,000. I think they've had 2,500 on Christmas Day a couple of years ago. But they thought it was busy, and so they started a second one. My understanding, this will be 2000 and very beginning of 2007. They started the second one to try and take a bit of pressure off the first one. And that just and it didn't take any pressure off at all. It just got people ran there as well. And then they started the third one in a similar vein. And that also didn't make any difference. People ran there as well. And they had 3 events rather than 1, but it didn't make Bushy any quieter. And throughout, as part of that process, Paul, again, I'm speaking for him, but Paul thought this would be a really good thing, actually, to be everywhere. Wouldn't it be great if there was one everywhere? And I sat down with him in the summer of 2007. We'd seen it. I'd seen it advertised in Runner's World here and thought, I'd like to bring it to Leeds. What a really good thing. Let me speak to Paul. I didn't know him. I'll have a chat to him and see whether we can copy it. And there was no public thing about it expanding. And I spoke to him in the summer of 2007. Went down there in the August. I was the 6,013th park runner to register, so my number is 6013.
Yeah.
And Paul said to me then that wouldn't it be great if there was one in every town in the world? And he definitely had. And there was only 3 in West London at that point. But he had that vision, crazy vision, wonderful vision, that early on, that there could be one everywhere. I guess like a sort of Hash House Harriers type thing, although I've never been involved in Hash House Harriers, but I guess that kind of thing. Also during that time period, before I got involved, it also made the decision largely, had not really gone fully into it, but that in order to expand, it would need to be a largely centralized model. So if you could just say, yeah, this is what we do, go for it.
Yeah.
Some would work and some wouldn't, and you wouldn't learn from the experiences. You wouldn't develop best practice, and you'd have some places where it was really good and some places where it wasn't. But it might be a Wednesday or monthly or 10K or 6K or paid or men only or women only or whatever. It would sort of dilute the purity of it. And I think quite early on, before I was involved, Paul understood that. 1, it's a really good thing. Wouldn't it be good if there was one everywhere? 2, in order for there to be one everywhere, they need to be the same in almost like a McDonald's, Starbucks type way. I'm sure if McDonald's franchises allowed you to have green arches rather than golden arches or whatever it was, it wouldn't have been as successful. And so we started event number 4. So Helen, my wife, and I, and some other friends of ours started event number 4, which was the first one. Sort of the first one outside London. There was one in Zimbabwe briefly, which I think might have even been a Wednesday night, which doesn't exist anymore. But we really started, I guess, the first one outside of London. And by that point, Paul was saying, you can become the 4th event, but we'll give you website space. So you as part of what's called UKTT then, you become part of this. You have to do it this way. It has to be every week. You have to go to a coffee shop afterwards. It has to be free. It has to be this distance. You have to do this. You have to do this. You have to do this. And so as early as that, Paul had realised, I think that that the value of growing, but also some of the way you need to grow what I've tried to do is kind of take that on, carry that baton on, and simplify as much as possible and centralize as much as possible. So when we start in a new country, I mean, New Zealand, part of New Zealand's been around forever, but we started more recently. We've started in Germany, we've started in Japan, and we've started in Austria, and we've started in the Netherlands. Is this is exactly how you do it. You have to do it like this, and it'd be really, really simple. And the simpler you can make it, the easier it is to grow, and the easier it is to scale. So we're about 2,100 or 2,200 events right now. I think we'll be at 10,000 events within 10 years or something. And we have plans to move to lots of other countries. So we'll probably be at 100 countries within 10 years or something like that if everything goes to plan. And I think why is Parkrun successful? And it comes back to something I said earlier. So why is there the demand? Because it's all very well having a simple model that works really well, that scales around the world. But why is there a demand for that model? I really do think human beings have a built-in need to be outdoors and social and active. And there are very few opportunities in the world to do that. Very, very few, particularly when you bring cost into it. I've got 2 young kids. On Sunday at Juniors, my daughter volunteered, I volunteered. In fact, my wife volunteered as well, actually. All 3 of us volunteered, and Aston ran. But any given week, the 4 of us will do a combination of spectating, volunteering, walking and running. And you can kind of opt in and out, and we all opt in and out of all of those things all the time. There's very, very few opportunities to do that. In fact, I can't think of other opportunities. We can take our kids swimming and watch them. I know we can go swimming with them, but there are very few opportunities to do that. And I think that really cuts to the heart of what being a human being is. And some of us are really extrovert, and some of us are introvert. I'm quite an introvert. I like to just be part of it and be around people, but not be, if I can help it, I can't avoid it sometimes, but not being front and center. I like to just kind of mill around and be there. And I don't even, sometimes I'll just sit in the cafe at Juniors. I'll sit in the cafe and have a coffee and just watch through the glass. And Helen, who my wife, is much more outgoing. Aren't you going to come out and speak to people? And I'm like, I'm quite happy just sitting here and watching the world go by, and and that's fine. And so I think that drives the demand. I think that people really, whether it's conscious or not, whether they agree or not, I think everybody has that need in them somewhere. And then when they see this opportunity that is Parkrun to fulfill that need, and then we provide a really, really, really simple, easy, straightforward model that says, if you do it like this, it'll work, and we know it'll work. A bit like McDonald's will say, if you want to sell burgers, do it like this, and it'll work. Hopefully we're doing a little bit more social good. But there you go, same thing.
And I think that the cost thing is an important one, Tom, because everyone, you used to always say, but running is so cheap, it's the cheapest sport. Running in of itself, if you didn't have to worry about shoes or anything, of course it's cheap, it's free, it's just your body, but nothing is free, and particularly all sports these days cost money. Running is certainly, I've spent many thousands of dollars on running and have loved doing it, but this, it's free to go along, it's so accessible for people. I think that's such an important thing, because so few events these days are.
Yes, I think there's also, it changes the culture. So I think, one, you're absolutely right. Running events are really expensive often, not always. Some club events are fantastic value, and right, we're not anti things being charged for at all. I think there's a place for really expensive big city marathons, and there's a place for relatively expensive local races, and there's a place for relatively cheap club events, and so on. There's a place for everybody. But I think running was becoming more and more expensive. So I think just simply making things cheaper and more accessible is a really important thing. At the same time, I think being free changes the culture of the event. And so, let's say it was £1 a week or 50 pence a week or whatever. It would affect, for a lot of people, effectively that would be free. If you were saying to me it's 50p a week, it's £25 a year, £26 a year, whatever it is, that would effectively be free for me. So £25 a year is for a lot of people is a low enough level of money. It's not really materially any difference from being nothing.
Yeah.
But it would change it completely if I had to take 50 pence each time, if I had to pay 50p, if I had to sign up for a direct debit or something. And then I'd feel like I was paying for some things, maybe so I deserved something back in return. And I think the fact that it's free, like I say, changes the ethos around it profoundly and even against a nominal fee. It changes it completely. I would go far less often, I think. We would go far less often if it was 50 pence per person per week or £1 per person per week than if it was free. And actually the two, I know for a lot of people that makes a huge difference. I know for a lot of people £25 a year is a lot of money. If people are really on the breadline, that's a challenge. But for a lot of people it isn't.
Yeah.
And I think it still changes it for them. So it's not purely the actual cost. It's the culture of we're all in this together.
Yeah.
It's going to be completely free forever. We'll never charge you a penny. You don't have to sign up for anything. You can opt out of our emails. In fact, if you really want to opt out of things, you don't even have to register. You can just come along and run around and not take a time or not register, whatever. That's fine too. And I think that really does change what Parkrun is in a really powerful way and should be protected. And that takes us back to the bringing Parkrun back post pandemic, as it were. We worked incredibly hard not to bring it back in a way that broke those things. So saying, I don't know, you have to pre-register for the event and you have to turn up with a barcode, let's say, that is specific to that day. So rather than at the minute, I'm 6013, I can turn up anywhere. I could go to Moscow or Soweto or San Francisco tomorrow and parkrun. Well, not tomorrow because it's a Tuesday, but I could go to tomorrow and parkrun. If we said actually it's still free, but all you've got to do is in the week up to the Saturday, you have to register for the event you're going to, and there's a limited number of registrations, 50 or 100 or something. And you print out the barcode that's specific to that day, and you turn up, and that would break it.
Oh, it's just a whole lot of awkward.
Yeah, exactly right. And actually, the organised, dead keen triathletes would all manage to do it.
Yeah,
great, brilliant. You'd have loads of triathletes running around. The single parent families with 3 kids in disadvantaged communities that don't have a printer and have really sketchy internet, etc., they'd never do it.
Yeah.
And they'd be excluded. You'd be creating a structure. We've heard a lot in the last few years, we've heard a lot about structural discrimination, the way a society can be structured that discriminates against a specific group of people, be it directly or indirectly. Things like that. Okay, we're going to limit to 50 people a week or 100 people a week, and each week you've got to overcome these little barriers in order to be one of those selected 50 or 100 people.
Yeah.
That would structurally discriminate against the people we are most keen to engage.
Getting involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like Parkrun, it doesn't just happen in parks around communities, does it? Like Parkrun takes place in places like prisons and things like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've always felt Parkrun should be for everyone, and it's really at the heart of what we do. And now there are, I think almost anybody can do it. There are some people will write to us and say, well, I work every Saturday, so I can't do it. Which I understand that, and that is a shame. But you have to balance what is it, so people understand what it is. I think if you dilute it too much, few organisations around the world, often with deeper pockets than us and more running experience than us, have tried to replicate Parkrun, and they've none of them have ever succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things I think they get wrong is they'll do a Wednesday night and a 1K and a 5K and a monthly and a 9 a.m. or an 11 and you don't know what it is. And I think people need to know what they're signing up for and what they're doing, particularly if they're moving around a little bit with it. And so I've lost my train of thought now. What was I saying? What?
And so Parkrun's for everyone.
Oh yeah, that's right. In prisons, that's right. So we try and balance that. It's for everybody. It's a health and well-being initiative.
Yeah.
But we have to be quite tight about what it is, so we don't dilute it, so it becomes nothing for anybody really. And about probably 4 years ago ish, we had an approach from a prison in the UK called HMP Havering, and we had approaches from prisons before, but prisons before always wanted to change what we do. So can we do it monthly? Can we do it on a Sunday? Can we make it a mile? And we just said no. It's got to be free weekly time, 5K for everybody. Otherwise, not at all. Otherwise, you can't do it. And Havering said that they could accommodate that. So we started this parkrun event it's called Black Moon Parkrun in HMP Havering, and I think we all thought it would be a good thing. So people who are in prison by definition have made some bad choices in life, and some crimes are worse than others, of course. But they've made some bad choices in life, and we believe as an organisation, we believe in rehabilitation, and we believe in bringing people back into community, ideally in a way that minimises their chance of reoffending and making the bad choices again. I mean, you can kind of ostracise people and give them bread and water, and not give them anything, not educate them at all, and not give them anything positive. But actually, they're more likely to come out and reoffend. So, are you more interested in punishing them, or are you more interested in trying to make the world a better place? And we felt Parkrun could offer a good solution, or particularly around rehabilitation. One, it would give prisoners something positive to focus on whilst they were inside, and two, because we insisted it had to be 5K and it had to be every week, and it had to be a Saturday morning, it would create this habit, this positive habit that they could continue once they came out. So once they're released and they go back to their community, they can step straight into a parkrun community, knowing what happens. They're not, because a lot of people who are incarcerated are anxious and nervous and have insecurities and have low self-esteem. And actually, they can go along and they go, I know what happens here. It's the same as in the prison. I do it every week. I print out my barcode. I bring it. I can walk it. I can run it. I can volunteer. I can spectate. And so they have this positive transition back into society. And so that was kind of the theory. And actually, it was more powerful than we ever imagined. Within weeks, we were seeing the most powerful story. We've got a parkrun in a young offenders institute here, Wetherby Young Offenders Institute near my place, and I went there. I helped them set it up a little bit. I went there for their first birthday, I think it was, and I remember chatting to some of the kids there, and they're 15 to 17. Some of them are doing life sentences. They're really, they've made some really bad decisions in their lives, and they're teenagers, and they've got themselves in a terrible, terrible space. And you go in there and you participate with them, and you talk to them, and you realise, these are 15, 16, 17-year-olds, where when somebody said "well done" at Parkrun, that's the first time they've ever heard those words in their entire life. Nobody's ever said "well done," and I think you start to become, I think most people would start to become more empathetic around the bad choices they've made when you understand the background to what they do, and then they'd say, to their lives. And then they'd say things to me like, one of them said, and this is why we have our results are public. So they're anonymous. So the names are all anonymized for safety reasons, but they're public so that their friends and family on the outside can see what they're doing. And one of them said to me that his mum had started parkrunning in wherever she lived, down south somewhere, had started parkrunning where she lived. Now every Saturday she did her local parkrun, and he did his local parkrun in his prison.
Yeah.
And they had this thing that they were doing together, and he had inspired her to be active, and she had made positive lifestyle choices. Now, when on earth have teenagers in possibly doing life sentences, it's imprisoned in young offenders institutes, when have they ever inspired their parents to make positive lifestyle changes through their own actions? I mean, never. I'm sure there have been other interventions, don't get me wrong, we're not the be all and end all, but we couldn't believe the power of that, how quickly that happened. One of the lads said to me, this kid kept with 14 Lapper, the one in Wetherby. And one of the lads, because they often got quite small yards or gardens or areas, we insist it's 5K, so sometimes it's 14, 15, 16, 17 laps. And I was walking around with this lad, and this other one was lapping us quite often. And they were saying, well done to each other. Well done, such and such. Well done, such and such. And it was really positive. And he said to me, he said, before Park Run, me and him used to hate each other. And we used to get into fights. And I used to really want to hurt him. And, and he said, since we're doing this together, we've got this really positive relationship. And you're thinking, God, that's really simple, isn't it? Like, it's a really simple intervention. Two kind of arch enemies who hate each other. Oh, well, let's bring Park Run in. One does it in about 25 minutes. One does it in about 55 minutes. The 25-minute elapsed, the 55-minute constantly. And they're best mates because of it. And they're having a coffee afterwards. And you realise the power of a really simple intervention to change really quite serious circumstances that people have found themselves in. Amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's like that shared experience. It's that improvement in self-esteem, and it's. Yeah. Tom, you're also, with regards to Parkrun, it's like green prescription as well, isn't it? Like GPs are now using it as a bit of as part of your lifestyle intervention, we want you to go do Parkrun. Like, how's that sort of side of it going? And are there actually any... Like, you've got, like, obviously thousands and thousands of anecdote sort of reports. Is there, like, research, universities really interested in how this is sort of, hit the ground running?
Yeah, definitely. So the best way to address that really is, I think when we started, we felt, you put a Parkrun there, who comes, who doesn't. That's fine. It was very hands off about who took part. We just felt you put the intervention there, you put the Parkrun event there, and people take part, and that's it. It stops there. And then over the years, we realised it wasn't just a time trial. It was a really powerful health intervention that totally transformed people's lives. I have lost count of the number of people that have personally said to me that Parkrun is the difference between them being alive and dead. And as brutal as that, like, just so powerful, this really changes lives. And so, okay, right, we have a responsibility, therefore, to try and engage people who are most in need, most excluded from society, most marginalised, least active, etc., etc. We have a opportunity here to really change people's lives. Let's try and reach out directly to individuals. And Chrissy leads up a lot of that work for us. She's our global lead of health and wellbeing. And what you're talking about there is the Parkrun Practice Initiative, which I'll get to in a second, which Chrissy was kind of front and centre of strategically and operationally of rolling out with the Royal College of GPs here. What we found prior to that was where we tried to roll out interventions to engage with those most in need. The thing that worked so well for Parkrun, which is word of mouth, stops right where you need it. So the point, almost by definition, the point where word of mouth stops is the boundary beyond which most of the benefit is. And so, the people most in need of Parkrun, they're not reading, they're not on our Instagram page, they're not reading our newsletters, they're not walking in the park on a Saturday morning anyway and see us happening. I spoke to a guy years ago who'd lost his sight in his 40s, was already kind of inactive and sedentary, lost his sight completely out of the blue in his 40s, and spent 6 months sat on his sofa. And literally 6 months sat on his sofa, down in the morning, down to the sofa, watch telly all day, in the evening back to bed, in the morning down to a sofa all day, in the evening back to bed, as his sight deteriorated. And spiraled into this depression. And his GP, who I think was a friend of mine, my friend Simon Tobin is a GP, and I think it was Simon that prescribed it, said to him, why don't you go to Parkrun and get out of your house, get to Parkrun on a Saturday morning. You can volunteer, you can participate, even if you've got visual impairment, we'll find you a guide and so on. And it totally transformed this guy's life in a really fundamental way. But it was only because this GP, his doctor had gone beyond our word of mouth and had effectively prescribed Parkrun to one of his patients. And then it completely transformed his patient's life. And so around all of that, Chrissy led the work on it, so I'm not fully across it, but we realised that actually we're not the right people necessarily to reach out to certain groups of people because we don't know them. We've got a small staff team, we don't really know how to do it. It's not our expertise. Our expertise is delivering really accessible 5K running event, walking and running volunteering events. It's not engaging with people who've got long-term conditions or disabilities or health issues or whatever it might be, or are socially excluded. But GPs are really good at that. So we went into this partnership with the Royal College of General Practitioners here in the UK, and where effectively we formalised, and if people Google RCGP Parkrun or something, they'll find it on the Royal College of General Practitioners website. Effectively, we formalised the process where a doctor's practice can formally become a parkrun practice, which means certain things like they put parkrun posters up, they'll go to parkrun, they will advise in the right situation, they'll advise some of the patients to go to parkrun. And so we now have, I think, there's 8,000 GP practices, I think, in the UK, and close to 2,000. I think somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 of them are now formally registered as parkrun practices. So a quarter of our general practitioners here are promoting parkrun to their patients and prescribe it. Some of them will literally write kind of prescriptions out. They'll write a piece of paper and say, you must go to parkrun once a month for the next year, and you must volunteer 3 times or something. I think one of the things, again, we've learned over the years is we're not the experts in some of these areas. So we need to engage with people who are. So we have another really great initiative that we work with called 5K Your Way, which was set up by another great triathlete, actually, Lucy Gossage.
Oh, yeah.
And Lucy is an oncologist, so she's won goodness knows how many Ironman triathlons, lots. She might have won more. I mean, Chrissy obviously is 4-time Ironman world champion and won every race she entered, and was it 13, I think, in total. I think Lucy's wasn't at that level. I'm sure Lucy wouldn't mind me saying, but Lucy's won something like 25 Ironman races, whatever it is. Anyway, Lucy's also an oncologist. And she set up with her friend Gemma Hillier Moses, who was a professional athlete who got diagnosed with cancer very, very young. They set up a charity called Move Charity, and within that, they set up a thing called 5K Your Way, which is I think it's the last Saturday of every month. They have these 5K Your Way groups, which are groups for people who've been impacted by cancer in some way. So it could be people with cancer, it could be people who've recovered, it could be doctors it could be family members or carers, it could be anybody impacted with cancer. I mean, it could be anybody. In fact, I've got this is my 5K Your Way hoodie, 5K Your Way, see on my hoodie, Move Against Cancer. They have about 65 or 70 groups, I think, now around the UK that on the last Saturday of the month, they all put their blue hoodies on and they all go to parkrun. And so we've created the ecosystem in which these oncologists and cancer specialists and cancer support specialists, this charity, can then operate within that and encourage the people in their community to come to parkrun and get all the socialising and the coffee and all that kind of stuff. The same as the Royal College of GPs can get their members, their doctors, to prescribe parkrun. And so what we try and do is build this ecosystem within which other people can also do great things. And if people go onto Google Scholar and just Google parkrun, you'll see that the body of research is growing rapidly. So we have an incredible amount of research into health and well-being and parkrun's impacts, and partly parkrun itself's impacts. So does parkrun make people healthier and happier? We did our own health and well-being survey a couple of years ago, where I think we had about 65,000 respondents, completed about 11 million questions. We did that with the Sheffield Hallam University, and they've loads of researchers coming out of that. But also not just parkrun, but wider health things. So we have an independent research board. Again, people can Google Parkrun Research Board, they'll find it. Managed by the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre, which is out of Sheffield Hallam University. And that came about, it was about probably 10 years ago now. A friend of mine, Andy Shannon, he's in the 250 Club at Bushy Park Run. He's also a professor of obstetrics and gynecology in King's College Hospital, London, Guy's and St Thomas's. He's a world leader in his field. He wrote to me and said that he was interested in whether or not it was safe to run during pregnancy. And he said at the time there wasn't much evidence as to whether or not it was. So the advice was typically don't take up exercise if you've not done it before necessarily. Maybe that was the advice at the time. But if you're already running, for example, it's okay to keep running. but there wasn't really any evidence. And as this kind of world leader in pregnancy, he was and a runner and a keen runner. He was aware there wasn't much evidence. So he wrote to us and said, "Can I send a survey to your female participants and ask them some questions about running during pregnancy, because I'd like to develop the evidence as to whether it's safe or not." And we said, of course. In fact, I said, we'll do it, but I want you to help me set up the research board, which is a group of independent academics who review this kind of research. And we helped him. We had about a million registrants at the time. I think probably we had about 500,000 women. That meant so he could write to 500,000 women and say, essentially, it was quite simple. Have you ever been pregnant? Did you run throughout pregnancy? What was the outcome of your pregnancy? Roughly, I think. And within, I think, 48 hours, we'd created the biggest study in history into running during pregnancy. Amazing. And as a result of that, Andy Shannon was able to publish research that showed it was safe to run during pregnancy. And so that nothing to do with it wasn't a part run thing, it was a running thing. Yeah. But actually, if you're a pregnant mum, should you run or not? And up to that point, it had been, well, we think it's fine, but there's not really evidence and we moved the needle to actually it is fine. The evidence is pretty clear. Yeah. And he was specifically looking at, do people go full term or not, I think. And there were a couple of theories as to why running might not make you go full term. I mean, I'm so far out of my wheelhouse now, it's not true, but it was around, I think, blood supply to the placenta, and it was around the impact of running. So could those two things, independently or together, increase the chance of somebody going into labour early, and then not going full term is then associated with worse outcomes in later life. And if people Google Andy Shannon Parkrun pregnancy, they'll find that research as well.
Oh yeah, we can put it in the show notes. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great character, actually, Andy Shannon. He'd be a good interview. But so there's all kinds of things. It's kind of become this big thing, and a lot of you said right at the beginning, Mikki, you said about service, and I think a lot of what we do is about our ability to serve our communities.
Yeah.
And locally and globally, and provide these ecosystems, frameworks, infrastructures, these interventions that can really, really improve the health and well-being of a community. And I think that sits at the heart of everything we do, probably.
I totally agree, Tom. And I think it's amazing that, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in your position and the people who work within sort of, Parkrun, sort of global headquarters, if you like, and just the impact that you that you have on hundreds of thousands of people's lives across the globe. But not only are you of service, but you provide an opportunity for us to be of service as well.
Mm-hmm.
People who have a need and outlet to want to be part of a community and be needed, and Parkrun also provides that. And it's interesting, so you've got and this is my final question because you've got a day to start and a Monday as well. You talked about Chrissy Wellington, you talked about Lucy Gossinger, I think Gossage, thank you. You guys are elite athletes, and I know you didn't say you were an elite, Tom, and you were a definite high age grouper. So 9:24
Ironman, so all right.
9:24 exactly, and a very recent 3:12 at Yorkshire Marathon, as I understand it as well.
For my old age. Yeah, talk about older athletes as you did earlier. Have these experiences, has it changed what running means to you at all? Like coming from your very competent background, has this just changed it at all? Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally changed it. I think it'd be interesting to ask people like Chrissy and Lucy, because they are very different to me in that sense. They're professional elite athletes at the pinnacle, looking to win world championship type stuff. Where I was a half decent, club athlete, but I came to it quite late, and I don't think I could have been a true elite athlete anyway. But I think for me, I never really considered myself a runner or a triathlete. I've set up a running club, and my marathon PB was 2:49. I did 3:12 recently, which I was really pleased with. 15 years after doing my PB. Mm-hmm. But it was never really my identity. So running was never really my identity. I kind of dipped in and out of loads of things across my life. And so for me, I think the community thing, it was always a community thing for me, probably. So pre-Parkrun, I worked in a gym in 2000, I worked in a gym called Virgin Active. And I set up a little running group in that gym, and we turned it into a running club. And and now it's one of the biggest running clubs in Leeds, actually, kind of 20 years later. But at the time, I was a half serious marathon runner and then a half serious triathlete. And I took the beginner group out so we'd have 5, 6, 7 groups based on ability, 7 being the fastest, 1 being the newest to running an activity. And I took the group 1 out probably every Tuesday for close on 10 years. I don't know, for a long time, from kind of 2001 to kind of 2010, 12 or something like that. And I'd go out. At the time, I could run a 17-minute 5K and a sub-3 marathon and a decent triathlon. And I'd go out every Tuesday night with the beginners, and we'd do 4 miles in an hour, let's say, and they'd be walking and talking, and they used to apologise to them because they'd know I was relatively quite fit. And I'd started this running club, and people would apologise. I'm really sorry for ruining your run. I'm like, you're not ruining my run at all. I'm loving it. Now, partly it's possibly I am quite lazy internally, so I quite like the opportunity to just walk and bimble along.
Yeah.
But I think for me, community and socialising was always for me the most important part of my athletics, much more so than the performance side of it. When I was at university, I played football. I was in the 4th team, and we were kind of a drinking club with a football habit. If that's the right way around, I've never been that. I've always had that in me. I think it would be interesting, some of the Andy Badleys of the world, where you speak to, Olympian, world-class athlete who says, actually, Bushy Park Run, that day in 2012 when he set the world record, and it was still about performance because he set the world record. He ran 13:48. He truly went for it with his coach on a bike shouting at him. He would say, and he said it to me, that was one of the most moving experiences he'd had in athletics, the bringing together of the communities. So I think, it's definitely changed what I think to an extent, but I've always been more about lazing around and being social than I have about being super athletic, where, some of the kind of the super athletes who've got, the Alex Yees of the world, the Chrissy Wellingtons of the world, the Andy Badleys of the world, people like Sonia O'Sullivan, Joe Pavey, they park run regularly. Jo park runs regularly. She takes her kids to park run. It would be really interesting to ask that question, I think, to some people who've had a really, Martin and Liz. Liz obviously double Olympian, 2:28 for the marathon. Martin, pretty decent, a legitimate elite athlete. It would be really interesting to ask some of those folks who had no disrespect to them at all, but to a level, a narrower view. It's a world record, or it's an Olympic medal, or it's a world championship, whatever it is the kind of success or failure. And probably had less of a social aspect to their athletics, a social experience. It'd be interesting to see, Ron Hill. I remember Ron Hill writing. I felt so honoured. So Ron, he ran 2:09 in 1970, I think. Incredible athlete in the era of 70s, 80s, when runners were runners, as people like to say from that era. And he wrote to me once, and he was doing his 50th park run, and this was, it had been 70 or something then. He wrote to me and said, would you mind if I went to my local park run and we celebrated my 50th there? And I'm like, no, Ron, I wouldn't mind. Wouldn't mind at all. That'd be an honour. And I went along. We spent some time together, and it was amazing. Or Dave Moorcroft, world record holder for 5,000 meters. 13 minutes flat when he ran his world record. He's now the chair of the non-exec board of Parkrun UK.
Amazing.
And loves bimbling around Parkrun in 27. He's had knee replacements, and he bimbles around Parkrun. For him, bimbles in 27 minutes, 28 minutes. Literally half the speed he used to be able to run it in. And loves it, and so it'd be really interesting to, for people like that, who had this single-minded elite.
Totally.
Imagine running 13 minutes flat for 5,000 meters.
I know.
But now they love it. And now they go around at 30. Bruce Fordyce, the same. You could the names kind of roll off the tongue in terms of these people who just I think it's transformed their view of running, and hopefully kept the performance side of it. Hopefully, we're very pro performance.
Yeah. No, look, Tom, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you about Parkrun, because I love it so much, and I'm so thrilled that it's,
thank you,
for the time being at least, it's back here for us in New Zealand. And I've heard you've talked about sort of where Parkrun is going, and you're wanting to expand into other countries, and it certainly feels like it's something which is here to stay, globally speaking. So it's a real honour to chat to you, and
likewise, thank you.
And also thank you for your time on Marathon Talk. Marathon Talk was amazing,
and
will still be in the archives as being amazing as well. So thanks so much, Tom. And you're on Twitter, and people can go to parkrun.co.uk to find their local parkrun. Would that be, or Google it wherever you are?
Yeah, so parkrun.com is the global site, and then there's country sites you can link to from all of there. If you go to any Parkrun New Zealand would be parkrun.co.nz, I think, and there's an events search thing on there. And I think most importantly, when we're saying to people, find your local parkrun and go along, you're welcome to do whatever you want to do. Spectate, walk in an hour and a half, run it in 15 minutes, volunteer, whatever. It is there for you, however and it's completely free, and you only need to register once, completely free in advance, and then you can participate anywhere in the world. And even if you don't want to register, rock up and don't without registering if you want to, and you're still welcome to take part. You won't get a time, but that's fine. You can still start, run the course, run with other people.
Put it on Strava. It's all there.
Put it on Strava. Yeah, it's all there. It's all there for people, and I think too often we hear, I'm not quite ready yet, I'm going to train to do it. And actually the best thing you can do is just start with it and get on with it.
Totally agree. Tom, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you. Wonderful to speak.
All right, guys, hopefully you really enjoyed that. It was so good to be able to connect with Tom, particularly because it was so early in the morning for him there. And I found it such a great conversation. And I'm so disappointed that Marathon Talk has sort of reached its end. However, I really respect the fact that the podcast was continuing to be successful, and then they called it a day at 600 episodes. I think it's sort of like an athlete that decides to retire at the peak of his career. Or her career. Anyway, so next week on the podcast, I am stoked to bring to you the conversation that I have with the OG of the paleo space, Rob Wolf. Until then, though, you can catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, on Twitter and Instagram at Mikki Williden, or over on my website, mikkiwilliden.com, where, in addition to the meal plans, which I mentioned earlier on in the show, you can also book a one-on-one consultation with me. And so that's over at mikkiwilliden.com. All right, team, you have a great week, and look forward to catching you next week. See you later.